welcome back to Google Developers Live. You're on the Chrome channel. Here for the fifth and final episode of the Udacity CS256 Office Hours, the mobile web development course. It's been a blast for the last four times, and our final episode here.
Yeah. Some of us weren't here for the entire one.
That's right.
Hey, took the whole course.
How was your trip?
It was great, thank you.
Thanks for coming back to answer the final questions.
Of course.
So I'm here with Sean Bennett, course architect at Udacity, Chris Wilson, course instructor and works for Google, and myself, Peter Lubbers. All right, so we've got a couple questions. If you have questions, if you're watching live, you can still ask additional questions. You can also vote for questions. You do that by going to developers.google.com/live, and then you find the on-air episode that's airing right now, and then you go to that page, and at the bottom there's a moderator to ask questions. So let's dive right in with the first question from Las Vegas by Samurawi. Are we going to cover the differences between feature detection versus browser detection using the user agent? And what would be the best way to accomplish that? So, who wants to take that?
Try to avoid using user agent if you can.
Right.
It's not always possible, but...
My history in browsers leads me to believe it's a really bad thing to link to specific browsers, just because, especially in mobile, there are so many different user agents. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of user agents that you can get. So strong recommendation, use feature detection. Modernizer is awesome. There are other libraries too. I'd just say go down that path.
Yeah, it's way easier, way less painful. And they work pretty well at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's more future-proof, right? If you use feature detection, for those that don't know what that is basically checking whether the browser supports a particular feature,
right? And
then you can fall back if it doesn't. But if you use a user agent, I mean, there's really no way of telling. Sometimes user agent strings are even passed with the wrong.
Yeah, I mean, a great example
string,
is what the latest version of IE changed their user agent. Did they remove MSIE, I believe, and just kept Titan instead? So if you did that, then you wouldn't detect that IE11.
And the reason for that, by the way, I'm sure, is that they had to remove MSIE because so many pages out there had hard-coded in a browser detection string that said, if MSIE is somewhere in the user agent, then do some horky old thing that is no longer even remotely appropriate for modern IE. But there was no other way for them to get around that. If those same pages had used feature detection instead, they wouldn't have this problem.
Right. Yeah, it's very hard to do it right.
Yeah,
the user agent
is
just incredibly hard.
There's a great article about user agent detection and the history of user agent that I'll try and remember to post as a response to this. That's hilarious. Like in the beginning, there was the user agent, and it's utterly hilarious.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll try to remember to post that.
Cool. So another question from Samarawi. Are we going to cover advantages and disadvantages of using libraries like jQuery Mobile and other capabilities like Canvas, WebGL, WebSocket? So for the latter part, some of those APIs didn't make a lot of sense in the conference app, the apps that we were building. You can actually learn a lot about Canvas in CS255.
Yep.
It's focused on games, but a lot of those concepts will apply. WebGL, I believe you guys have
we've
another course.
We've got a 3D graphics course that's taught in WebGL. It actually uses 3JS, so it hides some of the abstractions.
A lot of people do that, right?
But it's if you want to learn more about that, that's great. WebSockets for mobile, I mean, that's basically like fine. You can use that
we
anywhere.
actually discussed it in detail in last week's episode.
Yeah.
Chris was on the beach, of course, but
I was on the dive boat. On the dive boat. I wasn't on the beach. I was on the dive boat.
But as far as I know, a lot of these, a lot of those technologies are supported reasonably well in various mobile browsers.
I think Canvas, WebGL, WebSockets. These are really go learn about how to use those features, and you learn about how to use them on mobile. But for the first part of this question, no. Short answer. Mostly because using libraries like jQuery Mobile, they're great libraries. We really wanted to teach the fundamentals of how mobile is different, like how what we even mean when we say develop mobile first. And a lot of those, you may not end up looking at the exact technical details of the lessons that we cover in this later on, but you need to understand why they're there and what they're doing for you. And I think that was what we were really trying to get at.
Yep, perfect. All right, so next question from Dakar, from Bakum. How do you think it's possible to build more web applications with high quality and awesome design? Because sometimes it's a real programming
real problem.
Real problem, sorry, comparing to native apps. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest challenges right now, is that there are a lot of things that are not missing really, but maybe a little harder to do on the mobile web. But a lot of that is because it is this portable platform that goes across all these different environments and scenarios. And it's relatively easy to write a tool or support developers who are building applications that only run on one form factor of device or two form factors of device. And I think that we're getting there. I think tools have come an amazing distance.
Just in the last year.
Easily in the last year. In the last 6 months even. There's some pretty cool stuff that's happened. So I think that we are definitely getting there. I think design tools in the native design tools in the mobile web platform particularly are kind of an area for improvement right now. But I also think there are some really big names getting into that space that are going to help dramatically. The things that I've seen out of Adobe, for exple, over the last year or two, pretty amazing. Like those, I would have, just been jumping up and down for that. So.
And a lot of the stuff they're doing, they're trying to kind of open source some of that. Developer tools too. I mean, if you've looked at the brackets editor, and that's primarily focused on web development. So mobile web development as well is fantastic. So there's a lot of people working on tooling.
And I don't think there's going to be just one tool set either. I remember even way back in the day, in the late 90s, at Microsoft, we started supporting the web platform in tools. And the interesting thing was we had multiple different and wildly different versions of tools. Like we had Front Page. It was really more about like revision control system almost more than anything. It had a WYSIWYG editor that was okay, but certainly not great. But the revision control and the hooking up to the back end was really powerful. And then we had Visual InterDev, I think it was called, which was like the developer tool. And it was, really it helped you build your JavaScript, but it didn't know anything about HTML, or it didn't really bring it together. And I think now we're starting to see the tools that bring all of these pieces together.
All right, so question from Pierre in Stockholm. Any tips for responsive design media query breakpoint values? Some designers argue it's in vain to seek them, but instead to let your specific layout dictate where they are. Chris, you also mentioned. Let's take that first.
Those are separate. Let's do one at a time.
So
they're both good questions. But
should you use breakpoints?
Go ahead.
I mean, I don't think he's asking whether you should, but like, are there specific values that are good starting points?
Yes.
I think that wholly depends on the kind of app you're building. If you're building something fairly, traditional or typical, then there are good, good ideas to have. But I think the point that some designers argue that you really should make these decisions in the context of whatever you're building is a really good one.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's partly your layout and where it naturally makes sense to start breaking things. It can also be what devices you think are most appropriate to support. Although it was interesting because we had a talk given by Luke Wroblewski a couple weeks ago for our Chrome developer relations team. And Luke had this diagram where he showed like all of the screen sizes of a wide variety of mobile devices. And it was interesting because you didn't see a lot of clustering. Like I would have expected more clustering around a mobile phone size and a tablet size, and desktop is kind of all over the board. And there wasn't as much as you would think. There was so much bleed over between the two because there are so many devices out. And he even he showed what if you just limited it to one manufacturer? and chose like Samsung, I think. And it was still like, 20 devices because they have a huge range. And I think that's the interesting thing is there are so many different devices. It's harder to hook with that. And it's really better to say, this is what you're going to get when you're on a device like a mobile phone, because this is how my layout works best on it.
Yeah.
And think about how it's going to work best when you move up to the next device. Maybe it just scales up. Maybe it then you have room for a little column next to it, and that's really what you want. You want to put your toolbar on the side or things like that.
Yeah. So second part of the question, Chris, you mentioned screen proportions 2x, 3x. How do you use that?
I did. There is a min and max device pixel ratio and a min resolution, min and max resolution too, I think. And as media query parameters, I forget what the word for the inputs to them are, for media query rules. And I think that you could just use those to say, if you're a minimum device resolution of this, then use this high resolution image, or if you're not, don't. The only thing I will say is make sure to capture both of those, the min and the max, so that you don't have a high resolution device download both images. And obviously always run in the profiler and see what your downloads are.
Okay. So from Stockholm, we jump to Norway, so keeping it in Scandinavia. What's the best scenario for mobile web apps if you want to use MongoDB, NoSQLDB, not CouchDB? What are some good libraries that will take care of dirty, updated, missing local cache hits, etc.? Control flow related. So
we had an interesting conversation about this one before the show, because we were looking through the questions, and this is a tough one. And I think Sean, you made a comment that I thought was really appropriate. That I think maybe people are kind of holding their breath building those libraries. Partly because we're waiting for Service Worker to come around. For those of you who don't know, Service Worker is a way of building very rich offline abilities by essentially kind of taking over what the request system does in the web platform. So when your application says, hey, I want this file, it doesn't just use this local cache or hit the network. Your own code can figure out what to do intelligently. And that's one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin, frankly, is IndexedDB. I'd love to say it's deployed on every mobile device that you might possibly be interested in. Sadly, it's not yet
the case.
But it is getting there. But the other thing is, doing a local cache database, a locally cached database system is a very hard problem, and it really depends on the scale. Your exact application. I was telling these guys about when I was at Microsoft. I actually signed up for the internal dog food of Exchange very early, like in the mid '90s, and it took them a long time to get it perfectly right, like to get it to work super well in offline, because it was a backend database and a local cache, and you want it to work that way. You want to step onto a plane with no Wi-Fi and have all of your email there for you in that scenario. But you also want to get delivery of mail instantly, ideally. And that was a tough problem. And it's also a different system that you would want to use for that than, the database systems are not one size fits all. And that was kind of part of the push to use IndexedDB, was giving a low level, just the indexed key storage system. And then you can layer on SQL or whatever variant of query language you want. So the short answer is I don't think there's a great library here. I don't think there's a just go use this library and it will all work out. I think in the future you'll probably see some come up as Service Worker comes out and as IndexedDB is deployed everywhere. But it's still going to be a little bit customized depending on your application. You're going to have to do some work there.
All right, so another question. I would like to hear your analysis and comparison of different HTML5 to native tools like PhoneGap, Ionic, Titanium, and what about hybrid apps and missing mobile support on different platforms, I guess, for certain features. So any thoughts? The only one I've used is the phone gap.
Yeah, that's the primary one I've used.
Yeah.
It's really easy to use.
Right.
And it's I haven't used Ionic or Titanium. I don't know if
so.
I've looked at them, but I haven't actually built with them. So.
So I guess we can't give you a fair comparison.
Yeah, unfortunately
They're
not.
awful, just because we haven't used them.
Yeah.
No. So maybe look online. Maybe we can dig up some comparisons. But I'm sure they all have their
I
great
think
features.
last 2 weeks ago, we had a similar question, and I looked up and found the comparison of HTML5 embeddings, app systems, and I think that there's also the whole second part of this question, which I think is around what about things that aren't in the mobile web platform that are in the native app platforms.
Right.
I mean, if there are things there that you desperately need, probably kind of out of luck, unless you can get them added into the frameworks. One of the big challenges for me has always been the security of the web platform is a very different beast than the native platforms, and it probably shouldn't be, really, because so many times I have to set up a new phone because my phone died on me again yesterday, and as I was reinstalling some of the applications, some of the native apps that I used, I realized, some of them ask for really wild permissions.
Right, exactly.
And you don't really even notice. You're like, sure, this game needs to read all of my contacts. It's like, well, maybe it doesn't, actually.
Yeah.
And the web, by default, of course, tries to protect you from all of that. And we're also seeing, as Chrome is disabling the NP-API plugin system by default, that we're just starting to do that. And this causes a bunch of scenarios to kind of come out of the woodwork, because a bunch of people used this for really weird things with custom plugins. I used it for my web MIDI shim, actually, so that kind of dies if you don't re-enable it. But all of those pieces together, they kind of help us figure out what's missing from the platform. And I will say, a tremendous number of those things have gone into the mobile web platform.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the device access lesson, you get a feel for, wow, you do have access to a lot of neat stuff. And that's pretty exciting.
And I think that'll grow over time.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
that will grow. I think we'll see more and more of a kind of expandable mobile web permission system. Like at some point, you have to be able to not hit allow every time my audio recorder web page wants access to the microphone, that kind of thing.
Cool. So we have another question from Craig in Maine. Maybe something for you, Sean. Can you talk a little bit about coding to promote unit testability and give an example of what a unit testable JavaScript function would look like?
Okay. So the thing you have to do here is code for testability from the get-go. It is very hard to retrofit your application. That, in my mind, is probably one of the single...
that and performance.
That and performance.
Those two are definitely the hard ones.
It's very hard. Well, actually, three. That, performance, and offline. You kind of have to keep those in mind from the beginning. And security. No,
Design for all the things.
Yes. You really have to be thinking about what kind of tests you're going to be writing from the get-go, and design your application to actually be able to run those tests. Your code has to be modular, fairly, small chunks that you can unit test one at a time. Call one thing, mock it up, and see if it works. It's really hard if your app doesn't do that already to retrofit it.
It is. And one of the things that I've always found in writing code that helps to promote good unit testability is you have to clearly define exactly what every function is going to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I get in this trap every once in a while with code that I write, with web audio code, because it's really easy to do, is you have to be careful about causing side effects. If you say, well, this is supposed to set the frequency of the oscillator, but it doesn't actually also say, oh yes, and it starts it playing, or some other side effect, you can get in weird situations when you call something else and it doesn't work because it didn't have the side effect happening.
I mean, really, all of these concerns are, you need to plan your architecture out ahead of time. And unfortunately, well, the web makes it very easy to not do that and kind of, play around with things and get something up and running, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't often lead to code that is easily testable, or where you have all of this documented well and you understand from a broad picture what your architecture is and what it should be.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, really, I think the short version is just be intentional when you code. Like, declare what your intents are for every function, every object, whatever you're doing. Like, this is what this is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it helps other people tremendously.
Didn't you supposed
Speaking
to?
of
Yeah.
New phone. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, and there are tools you can use to kind of help with this. For example, JSDoc kind of forces you. I mean, if you actually JSDoc all of your code and then test and make sure that it does conform to your JSDoc, it keeps you thinking about these things, right? Yep. Like, what is passed into here? Am I testing that that's what's passed into here? What's returned? Do I have any side effects? Good commenting and good documentation helps a lot.
Yes, definitely.
Great. All right, so back to Oslo. How would you wisely split the native, mobile HTML, and hybrid parts of the mobile app cake? Could you discuss this LinkedIn link here, VentureBeat article? And do you think they would revert with new tools? So I haven't read this article yet. I can probably comment on it a little bit later, but the new tools strikes me as something that there's an incredible amount of power in, for example, the Chrome Dev tools.
Yeah. Well, and this article is from about 10 months ago. So really they're looking at the tool set as it was a year or more ago.
Right.
Because that was as they were developing.
Yeah,
and they specifically point out performance tooling, which has come just
incredible,
a huge way in that time.
Yes.
Yeah. So I haven't read the entire article. Have you?
We kind of.
I think I read it actually. I remember reading it when it first came out and reread it again. And I think that I don't expect everyone to say, "Oh, we should totally dump native right now today and just do HTML-based development," because there are some implications there, and the tool set, as we've discussed, is still kind of in progress in some places. I think it's come a dramatically long way, and I think it's headed in the right direction, certainly. Looking at the LinkedIn's decision a year or more ago to go back to native after doing web stuff, I don't think they necessarily made the wrong decision at the time, because they didn't have all that tool set in front of them. I think that some of the things they say in that article aren't true anymore because of the dev tools. I think some of them around design tooling, which they only sort of hinted at, those are still probably kind of appropriate, but I do think they probably changed their mind about other things. But I will highlight that in the article, the LinkedIn person actually did say, we have all of our data in these object storage systems anyways, like all our data's in JSON, so doesn't matter. Like, we can go recast this and change it over pretty easily and quickly. And you should be doing that. Like, you shouldn't be writing hard coding all of your data into HTML5 anyways. It should be a data system that then gets pulled in.
And that's, I mean, if you're going to be splitting your application across different technologies, that's even more crucially important. I mean, and as to the first part of his question, how would you split native, HTML, and hybrid? I would say that really depends on what you're doing too. I mean, if you're taking advantage of something that fundamentally you can't do in the mobile web, then absolutely go native. I mean, me personally, if I can do it with web technologies, that's probably the route that I'm going to choose, just because one code base is so much better to maintain in my eyes than multiple code bases. So if I have that option, I'm going to take it. You don't always.
Good point.
And I mean, hybrid is really just a way of getting the packaging and delivery semantics of native while still building in mobile.
The store and deployment. Right.
Discovery.
Cool. All right. So our final question at least for now,
Mm-hmm.
from
Get your
Pierre
questions in now.
in Stockholm. It's still possible. So thanks for the awesome course and the fabulous staff. Thank you. Is there any reason in the Flexbox demo to prefer the section tag over the div? And by the way, hope the water was warm in Hawaii.
Quite warm. It's nice. Warm for Hawaii in the winter.
Well, thanks,
say.
Pierre. Yeah, there was a good reason for that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this is specific to the Flexbox demo in any way.
Right.
But in general, if you can use a more semantically specific tag, you want to do that.
But there wasn't any reason to do that in the
No.
Flexbox demo.
No. Section or div would work fine because we didn't have, say, an article and a section and all that stuff. But one of the initial big pushes with HTML5 was actually having semantic content.
Exactly.
Which makes things much easier to read and parse and figure out
Well, that's really taken
what
off.
you're doing.
A lot of those tags are now widely used.
I think that was one of the earliest things, and now it's basically everywhere.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, semantic markup, if you can do it, and if it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up the questions. So we've enjoyed being here for 5 weeks in a row. Hopefully, you've had some help with the course. I think we'll probably host another office hours maybe in March or something in a month.
Sounds good.
So we can just open that up for questions ahead of time. So stay tuned for some announcements about when and how you can ask questions there. So all of these live sessions are also available in recorded form right after, same URL. And that's at developers.google.com/live/Chrome, and then you can find all the stuff there. We'll also do a blog post next week on the Udacity website, and just kind of recapping the office hours and making those available. So, well, thanks, Sean, Chris.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Peter.
Peter.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks to all of you.
Thanks to the staff in the GDL studio.
Yeah.
And that's it for this time.
Yeah.
All right, see you soon.